Tēnā koutou katoa. May I ask you to again return to your seats, and we will proceed with the next session. So kia ora. My name is Jacques Boot, and it's my pleasure and privilege to chair this session. So I'm Emeritus Professor here at NIDEA. That just means that I've gone off the paid workforce. I now do volunteering. And that's what I take in the census as well. We had to actually, my family and I, we were doing the trial census for the next one, so you can take off the volunteering role. But I really, as an academic, I will remain that all my life, and I really enjoy research, and I really enjoy talking about issues. And so, as I said, it's a privilege to be able to chair this session. I originally come from the Netherlands, as you may gather from my accent, even though I've been here 42 years. And sorry, I can't get rid of that, but I do have a New Zealand passport, and I do feel I belong here, and in fact appreciate the fact that I having been given the welcome here and are with my family, feel really belonging here ourselves as well now. And after 25 years at Victoria University, Wellington, we came to the Waikato, and I started here at the University of Waikato. But this is not about me, it's about the issues that we face, and the panel of outstanding speakers that are going to give wide perspectives on the issues facing the Waikato. And of course, there are many issues facing the Waikato. Some of them have already been alluded to in the earlier session, including the issues of population growth, of course, the environment, of the tangata whenua situation, and the youthfulness of populations, the diversity aspect. We also, of course, now face how we're going to come out of the COVID situation in terms of what's going to mean. What does it? We're not going to, as Tao said, it's not about going back to the old. We're going to go back to a new situation, and also, for example, in terms of international migration, we've got, of course, many issues in terms of inequality or housing that the media remind us almost daily of, and these are all challenges that we face. And we will need to be, as Professor Kukutai says, we shouldn't be looking at the next 5 years, but at the next 500 years. That'll be a challenge for our speakers as well. And it's my pleasure to now introduce the first of the speakers. So they'll all be speaking for giving their views on the outlook for the Waikato. And after each speech, there will be a short period to ask one or two questions. Then, after all 5 speakers have spoken, there will be hopefully also still a bit of time for a general discussion. Hopefully then we can integrate the 5 presentations that way as well. So first, it's my real great pleasure to introduce Manaki Nepia. Kiori, Manaki. She's a proud Māori woman of Waikato descent, and she started, of course, her bio with her family situation, and that's important. She has 2 young Māori men that she's caring for, aged 20 and 13, and she's the wife for 17 years to Jason Nepia. And she's passionate about Māori well-being, and following on from Taho's theme, she believes that in order to achieve positive and equitable outcomes for Māori, we need leadership and need to focus on outcomes that matter. So she wants to remain firmly fixed on the empowerment of whānau, hapu, iwi, and the architect and design of their own destinies. So, of course, professionally, she's had leadership roles in a number of organizations, in the health sector, for the DHB, for the Ministry of Social Development, and currently she's the strategy and relationship manager for te waka ki tenga o Waikato Tainui. Manaki, please. Thank you for sharing this morning.
Tēnā tātou. He mihi poto ki a koutou I tēnei ata. Nō reira, e te tuakana tahu me koe hoki, Sarah Jane, tēnā kōrua. E te kui ngahuia a tēnā koe. Nō reira, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko Manaki Nipia tōku ingoa, no Ngāti Māhuta, Ngāti Whawhākia, ko kai tumu tōku marae, no Rāhui Pōkeka, nō reira, tēnā tātou. Firstly, greetings to everybody and thank you for the opportunity to be here. To be honest, I want to thank Polly, Dr. Polly Atutua-Kā, who secretly or very strategically got Shafali to send an email to me sort of late January, and I accepted it, not actually knowing what I was accepting. And then I was like, damn it, I need to do some work. But it's an honour and privilege to be here today to speak on behalf of my iwi Waikato, but also in my position as the strategy manager with Waikato Tainui. And I just want to acknowledge te runanga tātari tā tauranga, NIDEA, that's the acronym, sounds pretty cool. Congratulations on your 10 years and all the best for the next 500 years, as Tahu put out there. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to play a video. So in my strategic thinking, I thought, wow, what's a really good video I can play? So that'll cut into my 15 minutes that I have to use for today. So I just want to play a video I think will give you a bit of context around who we are as Waikato, as an iwi, and the aspirations that we have. And then I'll just follow on with a few comments. So I'm hoping somebody over here can help me.
We are defined by our land, our river, our history, and the kingitanga. We are a proud people, each of us descended from the intrepid voyagers who crossed the ocean to land the Tainui waka on the shores of Kawhia in the 13th century. Led by Hoturoa, these tupuna left Rangiatea to discover a new land, rich in fertile soils, abundant wildlife, bordered by a plentiful supply of kaimoana. When Kingi Tāwhiao fled the King Country after the land wars of 1863-64, he provided his people with an enduring message. Māku anō e hanga I tōku nei whare, ko ngā pau oroto he mahoe, he pātete, ko te tā huhu he hinau, me whakatupu ki te hua o te ringaringa, me whakapakari ki te hua o te kaweriki. Since our Raupatu settlement more than 23 years ago, we have focused on building a platform that is stable and solid to realise the aspirations set out in Whakatupuranga 2050 and enlivening the words of Kingi Tāwhiao. In the ever-changing global environment, our world, our future generations live in, will be significantly different to ours. So, our approach for moving forward is one that embraces change and focuses on developing our people. We have navigated through the highs and lows of modern tribal life and are now valued at over $1.3 billion. Our registered tribal members have grown from 20,000 in 1995 to over 74,000 today. We now have a unique opportunity to reposition ourselves so that we are fit for the future as we move into the next phase together. To realise the aspiration laid out in Whakatupuranga 2050, we must build on the work already completed and continue to make a positive difference in the lives of our tribal members. Me he mea kare kauana he whakakitenga ka mate te iwi. Te whakakitenga o Waikato members attended 3 workshops during the year and provided great guidance on where we should focus in the next 5 years. What we heard was that we need good information and data to support decision making, and that we must also work collectively to leverage activities to increase our impact. We must also build skills in our people so our whānau and marae can work towards achieving their own mana motuhake. There are some great opportunities ahead, and we are excited about what the future holds for our tamariki and mokopuna. It will require the best of ourselves to create a better future for this and the next generation of Waikato Tainui. Kia tupu, kia hua, kia pua wai, to grow, prosper and sustain.
So yeah, that's my presentation. I don't actually have to say anything really. But I guess just in terms of that, just some comments, as was narrated in the video. We are a people that are defined by our wai and our whenua, cloaked in the kura wai of the kingitanga. And I think it's these po that have given us the opportunity as an organisation, as an entity, to navigate ourselves through this, through these challenging times. So I guess one of the things I wanted to just comment on is that in December of last year, what we did as an entity, as a tribal organisation, is we did a survey of our tribal members. And this was to actually get a gauge from our tribal members post-COVID, or as we started to come out of COVID, what was happening for them. And I guess what I should say is, even though it said in that presentation 74,000, as of last week, I think it is, we're at 80,000 registered tribal members. And so what I guess that identified for us when we looked at our data and we did a bit of a snapshot of our survey, 57% of our tribal members are aged between 30 and 49. Followed by 50 to 64-year-olds in the 21%. So tahu, you're in the e te tuakana. And our 18 to 29-year-olds are in the 20%. What we also learnt from that is that 96% of our tribal members know their marae and feel connected to their marae. So for an iwi entity, that's based on the kōrero. If we're about to build mana motuhake for our marae, we need to know that they feel connected to that. The opportunities I think we face with regards to that is that from a tribal governance and from an operational perspective, our investment that we are making in our marae, in our hapu and in our whānau is validated. It's where we are, that we're making the right decisions around those commitments to build our mana motuhake. Even though we're a tribal entity worth $1.3 billion, our investment actually has to be in our people. And so that's really critical for us as an organisation moving forward as we transverse the ever-changing world that we're about to face. I guess in terms of research, and I'm not a researcher, so I'm going to put that on the table now, but in terms of, which is on part of the kōrero that Tahu mentioned about the past and the future. And so for us, it's about ensuring that we maintain te ao tawhito, so the past, because that will give us the direction we need to take in te ao hau or into te ao tūro into the future. And so we hold fast to that. And I think you would have seen that in the presentation, in that we in the Waikato are very much, we take from our tūpuna. And I think Whitu started this morning with a tongikura from the first Māori king, and when I conclude, I will end with a tongikura from the current king. And so I guess again, it's just recognising that as an iwi, we have those opportunities to maintain te ao tawhito, to build for the future. The challenges, and again, it made sense for me to be after Tahu. I was personally thinking, I want to go last because I want to hear what everybody else says. But I guess the challenges we face similarly is around, the main things. If we're defined by our wai and whenua, we already know that there's a lot of pressure on those particular things around climate change. We know as an iwi that our tūpuna awa, so the Waikato that flows that many of you will see and be a part of, she is already over-allocated and she is under pressure. And so for Ngāti Tipa, so for Tahus whānau down the lower end of the catchment, they are experiencing the most devastation there in terms of what our water flows are. And so from an iwi perspective, our job is to fight for her. And so when we ask about putting water around this kōrero that's going on currently with this government around allocation, the kōrero we have is, yep, give us an allocation, but that allocation is so that we can leave it in the water. Let's give rights back to water first and foremost, because she needs it the most. Similarly with our whenua, we already know that we are a tribe of raupatu, so our land was confiscated, and while we had our settlement in 95 and we had the return of, I can't remember, X amount hectares of land, that doesn't equate for the devastation and the loss of life, and probably more so the knowledge that we lost due to that process of confiscation. And so again, we recognise that our whenua is under pressure, and I think as Jacques has already talked about and said earlier, there's the demand for housing, there's a demand for growth and infrastructure, and so from an iwi perspective, we're looking at what that looks like for our people, but also for the region. So part of that for us around, those opportunities that, and I think in part we're forced to look at what these opportunities are. So we're looking at water storage. What does water storage look like for Waikato as an iwi? We've had lands returned to us in Rahui Pōkeka, open cast mines. We are looking currently at what that looks like in terms of water storage, and how do we safeguard that. We're also using our lands to look at solar farms, so we can respond to power poverty, so we can respond to water poverty, because we know it's here. And in an interview that I did a few weeks ago with the Hamilton City Council, whether you believe climate change or not, it's in your face. And so I think for us, it's a big part of what we need to do from a tribal entity. So, yeah, there are massive challenges, but there are massive opportunities in there. And as has been said earlier, it's about how we manoeuvre in it. And I agree, it's not so much about adaptation, even though those are the cool words that people throw out. It is about how we navigate that. We're a people that travelled 1,300 years ago and we migrated, so we navigated that. We navigated a time when we were in the seas for many, many, many weeks, years, whatever it was to get here, and we navigated that time. So it's not in our DNA. It is in our DNA. We just need to reconnect with that. And so that's why I think for us it's really important that as an iwi, we're up for the challenge. We are looking at how we maintain our mātauranga. I think one of the things that we have learnt, and I've learnt in my space as strategy manager working in climate change and all these water reforms, a lot of the stuff that we seem to be referring back to is actually mātauranga. So that's a critical piece of who we are and how we maintain that. So as I said, I think Whetū mai Tinani started with a tungi kura from the first king, King Pōtatau. And I'll end my part of the kōrero today with a tungi kura from Kingi Tūheitia. Amohe ake te ora o te iwi ka puta ki te whiau. The care of our people is paramount, and we will get through this. Mauri ora kia tātou.
So we do thank you, Manaki. That's wonderful, and we have some time for a few minutes for questions or comments. Anyone in the audience wanting to kōrero about some of the issues raised? Yeah, please. There's a microphone, I think, going around, so it will come to you.
Tēnā koe. This on? Tēnā koe hine. Tino pai o kōrero ki ahau. I've been listening with interest, and I think one thing that our speaker really highlighted, and Linda Tuhiwai Smith said the same thing. She said, relationships are important, the links with Māori and all other Indigenous peoples, I would say. And I think you highlighted that with tikanga, culture. The culture is important. And if we looked at that film, a lot of it was to do with the performing arts culture, in other words. So that is a big link and a pathway to engaging with Māori. And I think it's throughout the country. And as I said, Linda Smith said the same thing, and I think the Western world really needs to look at those relationships, create them first, and then start talking about issues that matter to all of us. Kia ora e hine.
Kia ora. Anyone? Second question or comment? Okay, well, I think we will, as I mentioned, there will be opportunity to have some general discussion and integrating the different perspectives towards the end of this session. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Natalie Jackson, who is currently the director of Jackson Demographics, and she, of course, is also known as the first director of NIDEA, and she certainly is well known and is already mentioned several times today for her very insightful and very deep-going work on looking at demographic structures, demographic change, particularly at the subnational level. And while it's already been said that demography isn't destiny, it certainly is something that we need to monitor and we need to look at the implications. So, Natalie, we're looking forward to your perspectives on the demographic trends and changes in the Waikato. Dr. Natalie Jackson.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm delighted to have been invited to speak, and if I can make this work. Next one. Okay. I decided to use my 10 minutes to give you some insights into a very special phenomenon that we in NIDEA and the Population Studies Centre have engaged with over the years, and that is the demographic dividend, the concept of the demographic dividend and how it applies to the Waikato. We also call it a demographic gift, and I hope by the time I complete my presentation you'll understand why. Here I have a schematic age structure, and the importance of the demographic gift period. It's a period when fertility rates have fallen, and so there are fewer children at the base of the age structure. Aging hasn't, longevity at the top ages hasn't yet really flowed through to have a huge proportion of people at the older ages. And we get this moment in time when the bulk of the population is in the key working ages, say 15 to 64, or however you like to define the working age population. And it gives us this moment of the potential demographic dividend, which can turn into an economic dividend for the region, for the obvious reason. If you've got most of your population in your working ages, and if you have most of them working, it's going to be very good for your region. So I've just given you a look at it schematically, because it never looks like that in actual practice, and here you will see why. On the left, we have the Waikato region age structure as it was in 1996, in the middle in 2006, and on the right in 2018. Some of you may not see any difference, so just train your eyes in there for a moment. The demographers, Robert Didham down there, I see he knows what I'm talking about then. So in 1996, 64% of the Waikato region's population was aged 15 to 64. In 2006, that was 65%, even though it hasn't got that total bulge there, it's all in there, 65%, and by 2018, that proportion had fallen to 63.5%. The point being that the demographic dividend period is fleeting, and Tahu mentioned that. We come into this stage as birth rates fall, as numbers of children at the base of the age structure reduce. We have this time when most of the population is in those happy working age groups, and relatively few are at the top. So the peak was 2006, and we are moving on quite rapidly from it. Now, Waikato's remaining, I say remaining because we are moving rapidly through this stage, remaining period of the demographic dividend needs to be not taken for granted, needs to be really understood for the opportunities of the dividend period, the remaining dividend period to be engaged with. And it needs to be acted upon because the demographic dividend period is only ever a potential windfall. We have a short time to engage with it, and we absolutely must do so. It is very spatially diverse. The Waikato region has 10 territorial authority areas in it, Hamilton being the youngest, and over there on the right, where I live, and the Thames Coromandel being the oldest. Now, that is actually, on the right there, is what our populations are likely to look like as ageing progresses. Obviously, Thames Coromandel is relatively old. It is the oldest TA in the country, and Hamilton City is actually the third youngest TA. But the dividend period is heavily dependent on not just the size, but the relatively youthful age structures of Hamilton City, the Waikato district, and Waipa district. Obviously, Thames Coromandel does not contribute a lot to that lovely bulge in the middle, right? That's where people go when they retire. Hamilton City has 67% age 15 to 64. In 2006, it was 68%, so Hamilton City is also ageing. You see it, the base coming in down here. And this, of course, is our lovely tertiary age population. Over there in PCDC, it's only 61% in those age groups, and it's actually a little up since 2006, but for reasons I won't go into. I just want to illustrate how different the region is and how important it is to understand that it's spatially diverse and how we have to encourage people to stay in our areas because of all the good things that they can deliver to our economy. It's ethnically diverse, highly multicultural, and you see here the Waikato region's age structure in 1996, and this is the Māori population. We have Asian, Pacific people, and Middle Eastern, Latin American, with European on the outside. And over here in 2018, this is each age group as a proportion of total responses. And you see what a large proportion of the overall population is accounted for by non-European. In 2018, 44% of all responses were Māori, Pacific and Asian. About 33%, of people aged up to 34 years, about 33% were Māori. You have to understand these age structures as moving feasts, okay? So I'm trying to explain that the base is coming in and the top is growing out. But what is happening here, imagine up here at the top, as we move on, say 25 years, most of these people will have exited stage left, and these people here, Māori, Pacifica and Asian people, will form the bulk of the population. So it's really important to understand how the composition of the population when we're talking about the opportunities. Now, those particular dividend periods, they're not always caused by the falling birth rate and the increasing longevity at the older ages. Sometimes you get a migration dividend, and Ian Paul's forthcoming book talks a lot about that for total New Zealand. Sometimes it's migrants coming in at those 15 to 64 year age groups that tack on the side and extend the period of the demographic dividend. Well, I think this is quite profound here. We have, this is natural increase in the pink, going through from 1991, natural increase being the difference between births and deaths, slowly trending down. But look at the migration component over the last few years. It's very different to the past and very different to back here when the Waikato regularly was having net migration loss. This is huge. It's not just the last few years when we've had this historically high international migration gain for New Zealand. Let's not talk about what it will look like right now with COVID and so on, but this is what we had up until the 2018-2019 year. A huge impact of migration. And what's more important is that, look at their age structure. They are particularly concentrated over the main reproductive ages. So I've talked about them being in the main working ages, but those main working ages are also the main reproductive ages. So they come here, this is the net migration profile by age, and they bring their children, or in some cases they have a few more children. So these people coming in at this age, I mean, for the Thames Coromandel, they're all heaped up here, right? They would all be older, tend to be older migrants, relatively few here and very few over here. But this migration dividend that the Waikato has recently enjoyed has a particularly useful age structure to it, and with them come their children. With them also come extra births, and this helps us to extend the period of the demographic dividend. Here we have total births since 1991, around 6,000, fell away here. Then we had this little baby blip, call it a baby blip, around 2002 to about 2012. I see a nod from a few of my ex-students who dealt with it. And birth numbers have stayed relatively high. Now, for the Waikato, the birth rate is still around 2.2 births per woman. But the Waikato population is 100,000 bigger than it was here. Now it is 100,000 bigger than it was here. So although we're getting a significant number of births, and they are very heavily comprised of Māori births, the birth numbers are not keeping pace with the overall growth of the population. At the same time, they are helping to extend this period of the demographic dividend, keeping us for a little bit longer than an area like Thames Coromandel in that wonderful demographic gift period. The Waikato's migration dividend, recent migration dividend, has also been disproportionately international origins, which is very different from the past. So here you see 1996 to 2001, net migration was actually minus 5,900. 2001, 2006, it was plus 10,000. 2008 to 13, plus 6,700. 2013 to 18, plus 36,000. And 5.5% were overseas, and 3.1% was internal migration from elsewhere in New Zealand. So that has changed as well. Something is attracting people, overseas people, to the Waikato, and helping the region to continue this wonderful period of the demographic dividend. So, in short, and it's been a very short analysis of this, we're having a temporary extension to the region's demographic dividend period. It will only be temporary because birth rate's going down. The only reason that we've got that we had that blip, it was the last grandchildren of the baby boomers being born. That stage is moving on, but while we have sufficient people in the reproductive age groups, then we still get, at 2.2 births per woman, we still get sufficient births to keep the population going. For this period to be converted to an economic dividend requires proactive investment. It's no good waiting until these young people are, aged 15 to 19 and about to enter the workforce or come to university. It has to start from day one, even before. We cannot afford, in a world where our populations are ageing, fewer people coming into the base of the population, we cannot afford to waste one. Every single one is critical to our future not just for them, and I've been focusing on the economic bounty that they can bring to an area, but for themselves, of course, as well. That investment needs to be in children, young people, especially young Māori, Asian and Pacific people, our recent migrants, and those of reproductive age who are actually driving that extension. We absolutely need to encourage them to stay in this area, because there's a lot of other areas in New Zealand, of the 67 territorial authority areas, starting to look like Thames Coromandel, and they would all like your young people, our young people from the region. For the University of Waikato particularly, and for the Polytechnic, there's a sizable increase in the number of potential tertiary students, tertiary education students coming to an institution near you. Now, if we remember, about 4 or 5 years ago, we had all universities and technical institutes wringing their hands about the decline in the number of students that they were getting, that they were seeing, huge declines. And I had done work for Waikato on this 10 years ago to show that it would be a short period. The decline was because of falling birth rates and numbers in the early 1990s. That means that the children coming through to go to university would diminish, but then we had the baby blip, and that would rise numbers again starting around 2021, 2022. They are out there, they're coming to you, and they will be at the door of this university any day soon. In fact, I'm sure you've already started to see them. And that blip, yes, it's currently 9 to 19 years of age, so the local numbers should keep rising for at least a decade, and I met before the new Pro-Vice Chancellor. I'm sure that this is a message that you might like to reinforce to the university. So keeping them in the Waikato needs to be the number one goal. Investing in them, knowing that they're there, understanding their composition, and understanding how precious and short the period of the dividend will be. Thank you.
So there will be, there's still some time for questions, and I think this Natalie has clearly identified the demographic dividend as a positive force. When it becomes the potential dividend is turned into an actual dividend. I think that's one of the things that you're saying, and that requires the right policies. Maybe I'll start with one question, and then I see there is also questions in the audience. It's in terms of, do you believe that there is the demographic dividend may have an implication for how we're going to see future immigration policy here in this region? Is there going to be, because it looks like maybe it's going to be lower numbers now because we already have a relative youthfulness here?
Well, all migrants coming in add to the age structure at the particular age they are. You know, New Zealand's international migrants tend to be between 20 and 40 years of age, so they're desirable, very desirable. They do all sorts of good things to the economy. But as population aging, structural aging progresses, I think those migrants will become more and more competed for. So it's about valuing them very much when they arrive.
Thank you. We have a question.
Kia ora. Thank you for your presentation. I just wondered if you'd done any work on the historical effect of demographic dividends. So has New Zealand generated, have past historical, especially immigrant dividends that you've spoken about, is there any evidence to show that New Zealand has benefited from historical dividends?
Absolutely. Ian Paul's forthcoming book has several chapters on it, and in particular, New Zealand benefited from what he's calling an Imperial demographic dividend, notwithstanding all the points that have been made earlier, when migrants coming in around the late 1800s and early 1900s and their children actually filled out that portion of the population to generate, if you like, quite an economic windfall and allowed New Zealand, dare I say it, to overwhelm the Māori numbers, but it's a different issue, but it has been looked at in quite detail. And then, you know, these dividends pop up from time to time, but they haven't really been looked at very often in terms of their ethnic composition or their regional composition, and that's work that, yes, I have done it back as far as I can get data back to 1976 with Lars Braben.
Okay, I've got a question. Thank you, Natalie. Really enjoyed that talk. I've been thinking about two things in particular while you spoke about Hamilton and the Waikato has a really positive reputation about innovation around spatial planning and policy, and I'm wondering the extent to which our youthful demographic is fueling that, how our urban form is changing. And secondly, Jack touched on it just before, but what kind of policies might a city or a region use to retain these really valuable people?
Well, certainly the Waikato region and Hamilton particularly benefits greatly from its youthful university age population because they fill up an enormous amount of part-time, you know, casual sort of employment positions and so on. I think the region gets a lot from that. Sorry, the second question was?
What policies might
the
city do
policies.
to help retain those? Because
Look,
other areas are looking at them too.
You know, there's a zillion policies, potential policies out there. I focus very much my work on trying to help people to understand where the thing, what is driving it, how it's comprised in terms of the age and the regional and so on, and say, well, you know, these people don't have to stay here. I mean, I know we'll be seeing plenty on migration later on. People moving in and out very rapidly these days. A job somewhere else will attract people. Certainly retirement migration, which isn't necessarily coming to Hamilton, going to places like Thames Coromandel, you need to understand that that's what's driving it. So many people just, if they know about an age structure, they just take it for granted. It's just people standing on each other's shoulders by age, whereas actually every part of it, if you look at it, you can actually target your policies from the smorgasbord of potential policies, trying to work out what each component, each segment of that population requires. So obviously young populations like Māori, like Pacific populations, very much needing help with housing to establish, to stay. Older populations, you know, have very different types of needs or less needs and depending on which thing you're looking at. But knowing the composition, you can target your policies. That's the best way I could answer it.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I think we will be returning to some of these issues also with the next speakers and at the general discussion at the end. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the third speaker, Dave Mull. He's an associate partner at Botham Miskell. And Dave has 20 years experience as a planning professional and senior manager with local government as a planning consultant in the private sector. He's been Botham Miskell since December 2015, specializing in environmental planning and design. So he has a very in-depth knowledge of something called the Resource Management Act, which we know is something that's currently being reviewed and revised and replaced. And of course, if you put that in practice, he's got a challenging issue, which is dealing with the Ruakura variation in the district plan, which is about getting resource consent applications for large-scale residential logistics and industrial development in Ruakura. And so that's both on behalf of Chetwood Properties and the Tainui Group Holdings. So, Dave, we're looking forward to your view on resource management and planning. Thank you.
Believe it or not, I'm not here to talk about RMA reform. You'll be relieved. Te whare etu nei, te marae e hora nei, tēnā koroa. e te hau kāinga, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora tātou. It's a privilege to be here today to share my thoughts on the key challenges and opportunities for the Waikato region. It's certainly a topic close to my heart in the work that I do as a planner, and the issues that we in the profession confront on a day-to-day basis. So if I just move to my slides. Oops. Bottom. Oh. Oops. We'll get there. There we are. So I'm going to provide, I guess, a humble planner's perspective, and I've decided to focus on what I would consider to be both the most significant challenge and at the same time the most significant opportunity that we currently face in the region, and that is, how do we successfully plan for growth? There's a lot of commentary and a lot of clear understanding in our community that the region is growing fast, and the result is in an emerging metropolitan area that sits across government boundaries. The issues are wide-ranging and they're complex, whether it be declining water quality and other environmental degradation, increasing housing costs, or demands placed on our infrastructure, particularly in the transport space. But herein lies a unique opportunity to work together to respond to the challenges of growth and be innovative in shaping the future. Central government and local government and many other stakeholders have been working on a number of initiatives to face up to these challenges. So I thought what I'd do today, given I've only got 10 minutes, just take you through a quick flyover of these initiatives and then explore some of the opportunities that come hand in hand. So there's a number of key themes that have long been identified as fundamental drivers in how we plan for housing and urban development in this country. The need for, and some might say, the absence of a long-term vision, the need to be bold and shift the system that is clearly cracking under pressure, the need to create a platform for joined-up thinking between industry experts and government officials, the urgent need for a delivery mechanism for affordable housing for our most vulnerable, and an overriding objective to create sustainable, diverse and thriving communities. A directive for greater supply and new development capacity, and the removal of barriers to the supply of land and infrastructure. So what has actually been done? There's a number of work streams at central government level, primarily through the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, that have either been implemented already or are well in motion. As I say, I'll just take you through these quickly, so bear with me. There's a number of words. I couldn't find a video to cover this off, so the government policy statement on housing and urban development outlines the government's long-term vision to help build some consensus on what New Zealand wants for the future. The Construction Sector Accord has created a platform for industry and government to work together to meet some of the key challenges facing that sector. So that includes things that are well traversed in the media, and that's around skills and labour shortages, unclear regulations, a lack of coordinated leadership, and uncertain pipeline of work, and a culture of shifting risk. Kaina Ora has been established as a new Crown agency to transform housing and urban development through the country, continuing on one hand to be a public housing landlord, but on the other hand working in partnership to enable, facilitate and deliver urban development projects. The Urban Development Act is the supporting piece of legislation designed to enable Kaina Ora to transform our urban areas and create sustainable, inclusive and thriving communities. The National Policy Statement on Urban Development directs local authorities to enable greater supply and ensure that planning is responsive to change, while seeking to ensure that we meet the diverse needs of our communities and encourage well-functioning, livable urban environments. The Urban Growth Agenda is a very ambitious program designed to remove barriers to the supply of land and infrastructure and make room for cities to grow up and out. It's designed to address the fundamentals of land supply, development capacity, and infrastructure provision through the removal of constraints. Some of the tools that have been added to the toolbox include the Housing Infrastructure Fund, which is a $1 billion fund that provides 10-year interest-free loans to high-growth councils. Councils around the country can and have been using this funding for developing core infrastructure. The Peacock's growth sale on the southern side of Hamilton is an example of where that tool has been used. The Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act established a new funding and financing model to enable private capital to support the provision of new infrastructure for housing and urban development. Last but not least, most of you will be well aware of the government's plans to repeal the RMA and replace it with 3 new pieces of legislation: the Natural and Built Environments Act, the Strategic Planning Act, and the Climate Change Adaptation Act. Of course, this will make all of these challenges go away. So what's been done at the regional level? The Future Proof strategy is a 30-year growth management and implementation plan for the Hamilton, Waipa and Waikato sub-region. And this has largely been born to take into account the requirements of the National Policy Statement for Urban Development and the government's Urban Growth Agenda. The Hamilton to Auckland Corridor Plan sets the vision, growth management objectives and program for the corridor between South Auckland and South Waikato. Ultimately is seeking to support sustainable growth, and a lot of commentary, of course, around connectivity and transport challenges between Auckland and Hamilton. But it's actually more about creating communities that people want to live in, and it's about our well-being. Just briefly to touch on the Waikato sub-regional Three Waters study, that's a piece of work that's looking to identify more innovative, responsive and timely infrastructure solutions. There's clearly healthy drinking water, well-planned stormwater solutions and effective wastewater management is critical. The Waikato Metro Wastewater Project is developing detailed business cases for wastewater solutions in the metro area. The Metro Spatial Plan is being delivered through the Future Proof Partnership and is one of the key initiatives being delivered as part of the broader Hamilton to Auckland Corridor Plan. The plan has carefully considered how we best plan for our long-term future to maintain and improve our livability through the way we grow and the way we move around. It includes a 100+ year vision and spatial framework and a 30-year plan for delivery. All of these initiatives have sought to face up to the key challenges in the region and embrace a number of key opportunities. So what are some of the key challenges? Well, firstly, I think we've got constraints in the context of the cross-boundary influences that we see presented to us by virtue of the fact that the future-proof sub-region is right in the heart of the Golden Triangle between Auckland, the Waikato and Bay of Plenty, and don't get me wrong, that brings obvious clear benefits and economic windfalls, but it also presents challenges, and that's around increasing growth in freight, constraints in the road and rail networks and pressures on land use, And what comes with that is immense pressure on our infrastructure and how we fund growth. Previous speakers have talked about the issues that we are confronted with in terms of water allocation and quality. There's increasing and competing demands for fresh water, and in some areas the freshwater resource is fully allocated or nearing full allocation. The Waikato River is already significantly degraded, and valued ecological assets throughout the region are being depleted. Future-proof partner councils are coming under increasing pressure to provide new and enhanced infrastructure and services, but they don't necessarily have a corresponding community ability or, in some cases, willingness to pay. So there's some genuine concerns around the ongoing sustainability of local government funding. And I won't labour the point around the affordability of our homes in the region, because that's clearly well traversed and is a significant challenge. I'll touch on future land use. Clearly there's several significant factors which will influence urban form into the future and other land uses in the sub-region. And for example, that's clearly the impact of Auckland as it spills south into the northern Waikato, the growing influence of Hamilton and Auckland in the national economic context, the effect of key transportation routes becoming boundaries for urban development, so on and so forth. Immense challenges around integrating our planning systems, and that's about drawing together land use, infrastructure and funding in a cohesive way. And it's easy to read that sentence, but boy, there's a lot in that. And I guess the point I'm raising there is that we need to ensure that integrated planning continues to occur or is improved upon, because it's absolutely critical. And lastly, we must be able to respond to change. This could include demographic change, a change in growth rates, shifts in the market, and a lot of what we've just heard about, and ensuring that we can plan to be adaptive in that context. So where do the key opportunities lie? Well, clearly there's an opportunity to embrace the Waikato River and ecological areas as the heart of the metro area. And in fact, that's what the Metro Spatial Plan seeks to achieve. And that provides for growth in a way that protects and enhances the awa. There's an opportunity to improve our transport choices and the success of our urban environment through multimodal transportation-orientated growth. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's just looking at how we change the ways in which we move from place to place, and it's putting in practice infrastructure to support those different modes. We need to embrace Hamilton Central City as our civic, administrative, cultural and commercial metro core. Again, a mouthful, but what I'm saying there is the revitalisation of Hamilton's CBD is absolutely critical in terms of facing up to the challenges that we have as a region. A strong heart means a strong region. A strong, productive economic corridor that links highly productive employment areas between Ruakura, Hamilton Central City and north to Horatu and Ngāruawāhia. We have a massive opportunity to leverage off iwi aspirations, enhancing the environmental health and well-being of the Waikato River in accordance with the vision and strategy, while supporting iwi and embracing social economic opportunities within the region with a specific emphasis on hopu hopu and Ruakura. Lastly, what better chance do we have to create thriving communities and neighbourhoods? We've got a blueprint and a really solid foundation to enable quality, denser housing that allow for our natural and built environments to coexist in harmony, increasing housing affordability and housing choice. Of course, the rubber hits the road with implementation, but I'm confident the national and regional initiatives that I've referred to will build a solid foundation for further innovation in tackling the challenges within the region and ensure that we don't miss the opportunities that lie in front of us. Ngā mihi.
Thank you, Dave. So we have, with time is running on, but we can allow, if somebody would like to ask or make a comment or one, we can have one question, then later we can bring it back into the general discussion as well. It's obviously raised quite a large number of issues there. So anyone? Otherwise, maybe I'll put a challenge out for you there, which is the issue of territorial competition or territorial cooperation. There are a whole lot of legislation, and it's, that provides some sort of frameworks. Ultimately, is it possible for there to be collaboration without actually a top-down approach where central government says you must? How do you see the relationship between the various authorities, which clearly you say the geography means that that this is something you can't just do as one local authority?
Yeah, look, I think there's a number of very positive relationships, and collaboration is happening on a number of fronts between the different territorial authorities. I wasn't going to be too provocative in expressing my views on local government reform, but I do feel quite strongly that on the coattails of RMA reform, we do need to see some restructuring of local government. And this is just my personal view. It's a vexed issue, and I understand the factors at play. There's certainly not consensus in my organisation, but I see it as an opportunity to consolidate, to get greater efficiencies without compromising the bottom-up local community-based input into the process. But I do feel that there needs to be a genuine shake-up of how our local authorities are structured, and in particular their jurisdictions. There's just far too many. Therein lies the opportunity when we've got RMA reform that's looking to, I guess, commence some consolidation of planning documentation.
Thank you. Yeah, so as I said, we may be able to come back to and have further discussion about things like local government reform and RMA, what have you, when we get to the end, because I'm sure, in fact, the speakers may want to converse with among each other as well and comment on each other's presentations. So I would like to introduce now the next speaker, and that's James Whetu. James's professional background is in resource management and environmental planning. So we're staying along with that theme. He is working with his wife, Amy Whetu, for the Whetu Consultancy Group, which they've established. And they offer support in the area of Māori perspectives and Te Ao Māori with resource management and work with central and local government agencies to support iwi hapu mana whenua, to integrate their values and interests in planning and policy and research outcomes. And we should also not mention the background that they're also proud parents of 4 offspring live in Ngaruawahia, and so they're connected locally and with the iwi. So, kia ora, James. Okay, I just followed the booklet. There's changed. That's slight. Okay, we can manage. In that case, what happens when you have booklets that are not entirely okay? Then we'll go on with Bayard, and Bayard Huse is then the next speaker, and that's. He's the Bayard is the principal strategic advisor of the Waikato Regional Council, and he holds a PhD in environmental science from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. For the last 30 years, Bayard has been involved in central and local government in New Zealand as an information broker and strategic advisor linking science to policy and decision making. Its current focus is on horizon scanning to analyze emerging trends and their implications for council, the development of well-being indicators, a theme we've also heard already several times today, the importance of well-being, and the use of integrated spatial models, which I've had the privilege of being part of as a model called WISE, which is an integrated model of the Waikato that links economic, demographic, and environmental data to explore future rural and urban land use scenarios. And in this context, he's involved in several advisory groups. So, Beat, the turn is yours. So.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Switzerland aho, ko Swiss Alps, toku Maunga, ko River Rhine, toku Awa, ko Alingi, toku Waka, and ko Meirenfeld Marae, ko Beatuser, toku Ratua. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak today and for the welcome from Jacques. I would like to, in my presentation, to take you quickly over the next 2 minutes, a little bit of a worldwide tour on the Waikato. Where are we now? What's our current status? How do we explore the future? And what are some of the opportunities to get there? So let's start with the region where we are in, our Waikato. It's the largest region in the North Island, the 4th largest region overall. We got nearly 500,000 people by now. We got a very diverse environment from the largest lake, Lake Taupo, to the longest river, the Waikato, Awa. We got a lot of wetlands, not as many as we had. In fact, we lost about 75% of all the original wetlands. We have a lot of geothermal resources, 80% of the nations of New Zealand's geothermal resources in our area, and we're strong in terms of energy, mining, resources generally. So that means our economy is quite a bit resource-based in terms of agriculture, forestry, tourism, not as much anymore at the moment or for the future, and energy, aquaculture as well up in the Coromandel, but also strong on manufacturing, health, education, and research, and more getting into things like logistics with Roakura, construction very strong as well. So this presents an overview of some of the people who we are. It's taken from a publication that Shefali Pawar has published and for Momentum Waikato as part of Vital Science Projects. It's an excellent publication giving you some of the facts about the region. So yeah, we are basically strong in terms of Maori influence, 23%, much more than national. We have 16 at the moment % older people than 68, and as we heard from Natalie, that will increase dramatically over the next few years, up to about 25% towards 2050-60. We are not as well educated as the rest of the region, the rest of New Zealand compared to the rest, and we also have a fairly high deprivation. That's regionally overall. Of course, there are pockets that change quite a bit across the region. We still own the majority of us a home, 52 out of 100. We live mainly in urban areas, Hamilton City 40%. So to sum it up, we are getting older, we are getting more urban oriented, and we are getting more diverse as well. The Waikato Regional Council publishes every year an update on our Waikato Progress Indicators. So we take the pulse of the region on 32 indicators and establish trends over time. You can go to the website to get a lot of details, but basically, yeah, it gives us an indication how we are doing over time. And we see, for example, educational attainment. We're doing much better than we have in the past. Over the last 20, 15 years, we're still below the national average, but we are improving. Road safety, in terms of the costs of crashes and road injuries, again, the total social costs are being reduced over the last 10, 20 years quite dramatically. Air quality improved again significantly, but then we also have some red spots, like, for example, the residential expansion on land that Dave referred to as well. Up in the Bombay area, for example, we lose a lot of relatively fertile soils, and around Hamilton as well. Physical activity, people are less physically active than we used to be, and also community engagement. That's a survey questions, if people feel they are not engaged as they used to be. We can also compare with New Zealand, like I said, the same data, we just compared with other regions, or in this case, New Zealand. We do better in a number of areas. If you start from top, we basically life satisfaction, survey questions again. We are generally a happy bunch, happier than New Zealand average. 87% say they are feeling good in terms of their life satisfaction, good or very good. Housing affordability is still better than nationally, the average. We generally feel socially more connected. The social is much more than compared to New Zealand. Community pride, that social identity and connectedness. Te Reo Māori speakers, relatively as proportion, we obviously have a lot because we also have a high proportion of Māori in the population. Some of the red dots are crime, road safety. Again, we're improving, but we're still less than average in terms of New Zealand. Cultural respect is an interesting one and refers to some of the statistics we saw earlier this morning. Yeah, people are not thinking that a diverse community may be very beneficial for them. So relatively less than average in terms of New Zealand. Another interesting aspect and perspective we can do is to combine all those 32 indicators into one index by using statistics and various means. We call it the Wellbeing Index. If we compare that to the GDP, we can see that the GDP over those years grew much faster than the Wellbeing Index. And that's not surprising. We know that we have a gap in terms of social environmental progress compared to economic progress. So this is interesting and comes back from similar studies done overseas, that if we just focus on GDP, we miss a lot. We think we may go in the right direction, but actually when it comes down to well-being, to other values, we're not. There's a famous saying by Robert Kennedy that your GDP measures everything except that what matters most to us. So, that's the social connectedness, environmental values, going for a swim in a river, having clean air quality, and so on. If we look at the challenges, the risks, today's risks are globally. If we look at pandemic, if we look at inequality, if we look at anything really, starts globally. Climate change, it is not just a local issue. So we need to think, what do those drivers mean for us regionally and locally? And that's what a lot of the organizations do. We get a lot of organizations, councils, long-term plans, LTPs, strategies. All these organizations, they think about what is a top priority for them, what are the main challenges. Now, I don't want to go through all those and list them, but I did a bit of a summary and came up with sort of a list that I think are the main challenges that we face locally in the region. At the moment, it's certainly that inclusive recovery, getting out of that COVID hole in a way that it's not just for the investors and home buyers and businesses that cream up the money from the Reserve Bank, but all of us giving an opportunity to go along. Links to poverty and inequality, which already was getting worse before COVID and certainly has been accelerated through that. So it's not only income, material inequality, but it's health, it's access to facilities, and a number of others, housing obviously as well. Natalie referred to those demographic changes. There's some growth areas, some declines, aging, and then those structural issues that come through with the lag phase, and we need to be prepared of that demographic divide, dividend, that we miss out on workforce that can support our superannuation, I guess, at the end of the day. So environmental degradation, biodiversity, water, soil, again, it was mentioned today. It's part of the natural capital that we have mined over the years and is still degrading. Climate change, part of that. Natural hazards are increasing because we move into areas that are more prone to hazards and we have more people. Disruptive technologies, whether it's IE or anything else, we got to be prepared. Democracy, mistrust in institutions, again, we heard previously that as a factor, and then that underinvestment in infrastructure. And it's not just infrastructure in terms of physical water and so on, and roads, but it's also that underinvestment in natural capital and social and human capital. So talking about linking global and local, that's one of the projects, the Waikato Wellbeing Project, that is attempting to link the global sustainable development goals, those 17 goals, to localize them into a perspective. What does it mean for us? And then identifying targets, smart targets that are measurable, time-bound, what we can do and achieve, just as an example. But I want to take you briefly through the future. So, kamua, kakuri, in terms of where do we go from the past into the future. What do we think in 50 years the Waikato will look like? We just finished some population projections using NIDEA data and Mike Cameron as modeler. And so that is based on the most recent stats, sub-national data, and just gives you the districts. Change from now to 50 years ahead, 2068. So blue is a growth, decline is in red. It goes around in circle, but we are now, if you look at the start again now, so you see initially we got quite a bit of a decline in some areas, South Waikato, Waitomo. We got strong growth in that middle corridor from Waikato District, Hamilton, Waipa, and that is persisting right through. But at the end, in 50 years, we can see that we got growth in all areas, varying from about 8% to over 50% in Hamilton, where we project Hamilton will grow from 170 now to about 265,000, 10,000 in the next 10 years. So those are big numbers in terms of what Dave was saying. We have to make sure that we plan for those. Jacques was referring to model, the WISE model that we established with funding from central government. And demography, population is obviously one of the key drivers of that, but there is also economic drivers. The way the model works, it's a dynamic simulation model, so it has interlinkages, back and forwards feedback loops. The drivers determine the land use demand, and the land use demand is then allocated at the most appropriate place, at the most appropriate time. So there's obviously a lot of input data going into that, those decisions, from zoning regulations to suitability of a land to allocate the demand at that place. So that land use demand is a key. And I just show one example in Hamilton for the future-proof project. So we run through the model and see where the growth will occur in terms of different land use classes. Those highlighted are the ones which are urban land use classes, so different densities of residential land, commercial land, industrial, community services, manufacturing. So you can see the growth, for example, pushing down south in Peacock fairly early on from now on, and then persisting to the left, Western Heights, Temple View, Rototuna North, up there towards Horotu, massive land. Some of that at the moment is in Waikato district, but that will be transferred to Hamilton in 2033 or 42. So yeah, those are big changes. But what I wanted to show is we can play around with the models. We have to make assumptions. These are not predictions, but they are the best available knowledge that we can put to good use and be prepared for the future as much as we can. We cannot predict the future. So yeah. To conclude, I just, instead of giving you a list of projects that I would see as opportunities, but I want to just have a few ideas and thoughts about what I see as transformational change to make best use of our resources we have and what those opportunities are. One of them is obviously that integrated system thinking, and that's a key, and again, it was referred to already today. We need to join the dots. We need to make sure that we recognize that the economy and we as people are part of nature. There is no unlimited growth in a limited world of resources, of land. In the previous model that I run, you can only put land into the Waikato for certain demands as long as we have land. We ran the model, for example, with dairy, as Fonterra had forecasts, but we couldn't fit all the land that they wanted 10 years ago for future dairy into the Waikato at suitable land. So there are limits of development, and we got to recognize them. Then that long-term focus, we need to look ahead, and 500 years is a good start. But it comes back to, we think about next year, obviously, as households and families, and then maybe a few years ahead when our sons and daughters go to school and uni, and then comes retirement. But the fact is, ecological cycles today, climate change, biodiversity, water, all these things, they have a geological time frame, more or less. They are long cycles that we got to understand. And if we don't live to those boundaries, and people call them planetary boundaries, we cannot grow and we cannot exist if it's too bad. Linked to both of those, the system thinking and the long-term focus is really the Maori worldview. And in my view, I think we can really learn heaps from our Maori. I mean, they've been living here for 1,000 years, almost. And there is a knowledge there and an awareness that we all can benefit and share. So that the connection between Mataranga Maori, Western science, is a winner. In addition, obviously, the Maori economy in terms of making sure that they have opportunities and can make the most of their resources, again, using their knowledge, their tikanga Maori, and whatever they want to do to make the people well and cater for the well-being. The last one is that sort of well-being economy. Again, it sums up basically everything. What is a well-being economy is an economy that caters for and foremost for people's well-being and the health of the planet. So we got to make profit within those limits. If we sort of not look after the people, then the economy doesn't really have a future as well. So it's part of that, looking after the people. I think in the Waikato we got heaps of opportunities in terms of moving forward. We have to work across all the people, all the sectors, all the organizations, and forget that sometimes we are doing things ad hoc and in one way. And so that sort of integrated system thinking is the key, understanding our system as people within nature and how we can then have the best sort of economic future. Nami, that's it. Thank you.
So, for the sake of time, we will again restrict the questions to just one right now, but then after James has spoken, hopefully we can allow for some korero, some discussion among panelists as well as and with the audience. So, anyone would like to make a comment? Of course, go for it, Len. Yeah, I think there's a microphone coming to you.
The previous speaker sort of made it clear that there's a massive list of things to be done, yet the levers in local government are both hugely disempowered, and we don't seem to have a lot from central government likely to change that. We've disempowered central government. Yet when, Bert, you came up with a list of sort of 2020 big issues, I wonder how many of them would have been relevant in 1860 also. I mean, if you assumed innovation technologically versus IT. And therefore I wonder, do you need to go further and look at which of the ones do you have that you cannot go backwards and forwards with, such as environmental despolation? So are there some things in your list that we've just got to do? And because I wonder with this collection of lists we've had, which come from good thinking, how on earth you get a sense of what is absolutely critical out of all that seems to me to be a real problem.
Yeah, that's a good question. And in fact, I did that last year. I went back to when I started at the council before 2000, sort of in the 90s. We had a Vision 2000, and it just came across the desk. And I looked at what's in there. Yeah, we thought we have all the things and the challenges and the solutions. 2000, yeah, that's a big year, change of millennium. And yeah, it's like you said, yeah, some of the issues are still the same or similar around. And I think that's what we need to think about, those transformational changes in our thinking and really see, why is that? Where has our systems gone wrong? And in my thinking, it is because we don't listen to nature. We have for too long ignored our natural capital. We have mined it, we have used as much as we can. Even now, we use water as much as we can. We think it's free. And you read in the paper, 90% is wasted to go into the ocean. It's not wasted. And like we heard from Tao this morning, this is the river, and it lives, and it needs that water for him. So we need to find out those sort of limits of nature and restore it, a regenerative economy that lives in balance with nature and the people, and have that equality and people's well-being, all the people, not only some. Big task.
Right, thanks, Bert. Now the floor, James, once again apology, but last but not least, the floor is yours.
Tēnā koutou. He kupu tuatahi, mā kuki te atu i Rungarawa. Koia nei te timatanga, koia no te whakamutinga kororia ki ngā Waikato. Ai he tika, ka huri taku mihi ki te kingi Māori atu heitia. Me whakahonore ki aia, tōna wahine ho, me te whare kahuere ki ni utoni. Pai marere ki a rātai. Nā tangata whenua, nā mana whenua e ki ana e tēnei whenua. Ngāti hawa, Ngāti wairere, tēnei te mihi ki a rātai. Nā rangatira mā, a tēnā tātou katoa. Kia koutou nā amorangi Māori, wahine tō, tēnei te mihi atu kia koe e koe. Korua, Sarah Jane e tahu, nei te mihi kia korua, koutou. Te taumata, nei te mihi, nei te mihi, nei te mihi. Whānau, so my name's James Whetu. I had pictures behind my PowerPoint, but it's all good, so you're looking at a white screen with words. Hopefully not all of them white screen with words, but we'll see how we go. So just in terms of, just drawing on from what's already been said, I guess there is similarities in terms of what I'm going to present, but I guess it's from my lens, how I'm seeing things happening. And also just sort of drawing on some of the stuff that Tahu had presented earlier this morning. And I guess that the pictures of your tipuna and the story of your whenua, Ngāti Tipa, it sort of informs my why, and why I get into all of this stuff. Because I could be seen, and probably some of you here are frustrated with James Whitu when he sits in your forums or your think tanks, because I'm that guy that's going, so why are you doing this? So where's Māori in this? Are we talking to mana whenua? Are we talking to our communities? And I can see some of the faces in here of some of those groups I've sat in and being that guy. And so, so that's where I fit into this, is me and my journey as a young fella, and seeing the frustrations of my whānau trying to get where they want to get, but there's the system in the way. There's the system that says, what is mātauranga? Or what's this kupu mauri? What's this airy-fairy word that you're talking about? How does it fit in what I do as an intellect, what I do as a technical kind of engineer, or this, this person who's informing our evidence or gathering this information to inform policy and decision-making? So that's my why. I'm that guy in the room to go, I'm your critical friend, actually. This is how I'll rephrase it. I'm asking that question, and I'm asking in those rooms, how do we stretch? How do we stretch in that capacity of seeing te ao Māori, or a Māori perspective, or more so drawing down into a grassroots side of things and saying, what's our hapu and whānau perspectives in these policies and planning approaches or systems that we get involved in? So yeah, I guess that's just a starting point of how I talk and present some of the stuff. You get an idea of why I'm seeing things in a certain way. I do have a luxury being a planner, so I'm a qualified planner, but I don't call myself a planner anymore. The mahi I kind of do now is sort of different, and it's sort of bridged between what is it like, when I say planner, the consent side of things. So I'm at that grass level of how do we help you in your property rights, but also manage it against a framework in the RMA. At a public policy level, so regional, national, I get invited to these big think tanks, and what does the RMA reform look like in its impact, a regulatory impact statement on Māori or cultural values, as well as some of these national science challenges and trying to implement this kaupapa called vision mātauranga. And so I sort of spread myself around to understand how, and I'll say you people, inform where we're going in the future, I guess. And so where does Māori, or where does somebody from Ngāroa Wahia, whānau and Ngāroa Wahia fit in that think tank? So yeah, hopefully that's helpful to give you an idea of what's happening. And so I agree with everyone, there's lots happening. And so the challenges are huge. There's everything at various scales, whether it's right on our property to the scale of how do we address some of these big global objectives that sit there and tell us what we need to do in a certain time frame. And so how I've approached this to make it nice and simple for me, not for you, in terms of what I'm presenting is I've just outlined 2 challenges and 2 opportunities for us to think about here in the Waikato. Oh, actually, there is pictures. Cool. So I guess one of the challenges I see at the moment is how do we deliver these macro level objectives here at a micro scale? So we talk about the opportunities in climate change, but also how do we respond to climate change? And so this is coming through, pumping out, putting pressure on our central government to do something blanket across New Zealand, and then leaving it to regional councils, leaving it to territorial councils, leaving it to the communities to figure out what it looks like at a micro level. And there's some big ask, in my view, in some of these global objectives. And some of us don't even agree with what the reports we're preparing and putting out front of the public. So there's no shared or common vision or common approach or just an agreement in finding a way forward. And so this, what's criticism of public policy, it takes 10 years to get anything done and get it in front of us or set a framework with. In my view, climate change and also the UN Sustainable Development Goals are going to be fitting in that box, because it's going to take us that long, if not longer, to agree, is this an issue to address? And so, so yeah, I guess finding these things and having these kind of difficult conversations, I think is what we're lacking. I think we're too busy saying, this is my thoughts, I'll leave it with you and you figure it out. And I think a lot of those kind of things are happening at a grassroots, while there's this collaborative work that's happening at a national level, and then not really talking properly or over a good period of time to understand how we're going to do things going forward. Same with national objectives. Last year, 2 key national policy statements under the RMA got pumped out, one being freshwater. Benchmark is quite high. In other words, they want to see some change in water quality within this generation. So that's a big ask of us as a community. And also the other one being around urban development. So how do we create growth or enable growth in housing, but also have all these environmental, I want to say bottom lines, but in terms of standards that we have to try and align with. And, you know, listening to Dave and spiel around, you know, the growth that's going to happen here in the Waikato, especially Hamilton. You know, there's this word that sits in this urban development MPS called planning for the unplanned or out of sequence stuff. And, you know, if I use the example of Sleepyhead being one of those kind of developments, you know, the first response that came out, nothing to bag regional council borough, but it was like, no, we don't want it there. We don't want it there because it's outside of what we're planned. And so there's all this kind of stuff that's sort of happening and creating the challenges within the Waikato region. It's happening everywhere, but we're talking about Waikato here, and what does that look like? Also, there's, you know, talking about te tiriti o Waitangi, the role of te tiriti in enabling conversations and partnerships or cooperation around where we're going forward as a community, as a nation. At a national level, that's been happening, this collaborative talk, been happening for 10 plus years when there was the iwi chairs. Now we're trying to get into this local level and having those conversations, you know, talking about seeing Minister Nanaya pumping out a bill so that we can have Māori wards. You know, to me means that over the last 10 years, the conversations have always just been national. It hasn't got down to the grassroots for a bill to enable local level participation. And then the other one is just around soil productivity. Again, we're a huge basin here in the Waikato. And so how does the extent of growth in our metropolis and our towns and communities impact on those soils and that productiveness that sits within them? So the other challenge I see is that there's a hungry Auckland, there's a hungry and growing Auckland just north of us. And so, in my view, we're feeding this hungry Auckland. So we feed it in the way of resources. So there's this water that we've been talking about. But there's also other stuff, aggregate. And I want to say a few other things, but you know, that's just James's unqualified items there. And the other part is people. There's this growth happening in Pōkeno. They don't engage in Pōkeno. They live in Auckland, Pōkeno, but they're working in Auckland. And so it's, you know, we're providing this accommodation, if I go to the next one, of this Auckland's growth. And it's having an impact on us as a Waikato region. And it's creating this us and them, yet the resource is the same. The whenua is the same, but we're still creating this, oh, it's them, this is us, keep them out, leave us alone. Again, this misalignment of having a proper conversation around, hey, look, if we're talking about the Waikato River, let's talk about it properly. None of this us and them, it's the resource, or it's our tipuna, if we look at it from a Waikato Tainui perspective. It's a feature, our landscape that we hold important, so let's talk about it properly. Stop this us and them. Unless you're wearing a Blues jersey, then it's an us and them. And also, you know, in terms of this growth side of things, is putting pressure on our infrastructure, you know, so where's the spending? And, you know, it's nice that, you know, we've got this concept of taumata arowai, but it's still putting pressure on the locals to pay for it. And so the ongoing management going forward of if it's a new treatment station, if it's new piped infrastructure or reticulation, roads is always a big one, locals are still paying for it. And so it's again part of this whole, we are not having these conversations, nor are we really engaging in, you know, local government planning itself. And if I think about now, there's a long-term plan. How many of us are ready to engage in that? Because that's where the budget sits. With regards to opportunities, if I move on to opportunities, for me, I think there's this huge opportunity sitting with the Māori economy and Māori well-being. So there's been a few things coming through lately, one of them being whenua Māori. There's changes in the law, which now enables Māori to have this opportunity to go back to their lands, to go back and go through a process that could bypass planning. In other words, just go straight to the courts to get this license of occupation to be on their whenua. For many generations now, whānau have just been looking at their whenua, waiting, thinking, what can we do? But then find all these barriers and constraints in the way. So I guess when we're seeing it right now at the moment is whānau getting themselves informed and empowered. They're coming home. They're coming back to their whenua. It's getting difficult to find a home to build now or find a home to live in or buy. So the next best thing is, well, we've got whānau whenua. How do we go back and use that? And so in some of the work we've been doing with, from my side of things, with NIDEA around an NS11 project, we're seeing whānau wanting to come back to Pōkeno and want to come back to Waharo or Tauwhare. So there's whānau land out there and they want to know, so how can we come back, James? How can we find ways to use our land? How can we find ways to house those whānau who can no longer live in Auckland? So, yeah, with the changes on the law, we're seeing these things come through. Even some of these strategic and public policy at the local level, you're seeing phrases like papakainga or co-housing to enable that kind of interpretation or definition of activities for whānau to make an application to do something. In terms of thinking from a business side of things, there's almost an S on that, is this growth of a business network or this ecosystem of Māori entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, small businesses. Waikato Tainui has a forum or an ecosystem for small businesses, Puna Pakahi. You know, we work together trying to learn shared values around, you know, it's not necessarily about the bottom line, but how do we work together, how do we share? So that kaupapa value of whanaungatanga sort of sits in this, this business network. And so it's within that, again, thinking about the economy side of things or growth in that commercial sense, but there's this cohort or collective of shared values. You know, so it's not necessarily always about profit. It's also about how do we work together to make a living, look after our family, look after our marae or broader whānau or community, and then think about how do we get some money for the profit side of things, you know, in terms of ticking that other box that sits there. And then we get into the sort of partnerships. And so I use the term partnerships because as we move forward, you're going to start seeing, in my view, when we're trying to be innovative or change, so that ka mua, ka muri, I think there's an element of ka huri. We're going to have to pivot somewhere. And so within that pivot is joint ventures if we're trying to be more renewable in our energy production. So geothermal, as an example, as we move away possibly from hydro, sits on Māori land. And there's still an allocation element that still sits within it. So for, you know, business entrepreneurs or centralized kind of, if I use Meridian as an example, having joint ventures to get us in that space, to make it quicker for us to get into the renewable energy kind of economy that we're looking for. And there will be also, which we're already seeing here in the Waikato, but probably at another level of shared decision making. So we saw that with Plan Change 1, Healthy Rivers, if you're familiar with planning around water quality here in the Waikato, there was shared decision making throughout that whole process. 5 iwi would council, all having a decision, all sharing the risk of that decision. Waikato taking the biggest risk, in my view, having to tell their whānau at the downstream, down in Ngāti Tipa, around, hey, you're going to have to wait 80 years to see change. That's a huge risk for the whānau, for Waikato to take on in that shared decision making, but it was a shared decision. And this last one, and the second opportunity is future rural-based activities. This, in my view, is reflective of the legal mechanisms around how do we manage nutrient budgets on farms, but also this transition to a low emissions farming or low emissions economy, whatever it may be. And so these are going to put all this, maybe an emissions budget on farms. And so how our farms, our high productive or productive soils are used continuously in the Waikato region, because we've got a good healthy base in here. So what does our transition look like, and what's the value proposition for that industry or sector to transition? And so I've got the Taupo beef and lamb here as an example, because I've been doing this done in the Taupo catchment. If your plan is here, that's variation 5, in terms of how the elevation of water quality requirements has created, okay, so what's our value proposition now when we sell our meats? And so I guess there's the soil regenerative farming kaupapa that's been got a bit of momentum at the moment. So how does that fit and contribute to the way we use our rural, within our rural environment as we maintain food supply, food security, and uphold that value around what our soil resources are there for. So that's me quickly going through my slides there, Chief. All right.
Right, now, we've talked a lot about resources, and we've also looked a lot about opportunities, and James given some discussion of some exciting opportunities ahead. But it is one resource that we cannot yet manipulate or use in a positive way, which is just a limited resource of time. That's just something we have just given to us as something we can change. So some of you may start having kai on your minds. Let's just first of all, I think if there's if there's a person who would like to talk about what James has raised, let's have 1 or 2 quick questions, and then after that, my suggestion is originally I'd hoped that there'd be time for a general discussion among the panelists and with the audience, but hey, why don't we do that all in a formal setting where we're all talking to each other outside. So, but let's just give James, before I say the final thank you, the opportunity to respond to if there is a question from the audience, or maybe even from somebody on the stage. Comment? No? We are all obviously, looking towards the next part of the program. In that case, it is once again, I would like to thank all 5 speakers for what's been a wonderful morning. I've learned a lot from it, very diverse perspectives, also very encouraging as well. Clearly, issues have been raised that are challenging. We're humans, we never get it right completely, but as long as we have the right attitudes, we will be able to jointly to proceed in a confident manner. And so I would like you to join with me, and in fact, I'm going to... why don't we thank the speakers all in the usual way while I give them a small present that we would like to give to you as a token of appreciation for what you've done for us this morning, for all your knowledge and experience that you shared with us. Kia ora.